So, hello and welcome to the interview preparation workshop. So, hopefully my PowerPoint will work. So, yeah, basically today I'm just going to go through different types of interviews that I can think of and just some general advice for preparing for them. So, the first thing to do is just kind of outline the different types of interviews you'll get. So, the first type you may get is a personal statement focused interview. So what that'll be is they'll be asking questions about a specific thing that you possibly mentioned in your personal statement. So basically, make sure you know your personal statement. They may decide to ask if you've covered a lot of different ideas about many things, or they may just usually, to be honest, they usually just focus on one specific idea, and they'll just ask questions about that. The second type of interview you may get is a written work focused interview. So if you have to submit written work, what they'll do is they'll once again just ask you questions. I mean, a really typical question for written work will be, okay, can you outline what you've said in your essay? Which is a really typical, it's a really typical question. It's the same for tutorials as well, actually. They ask a similar question. First thing they'll usually ask you to do is outline the argument of your essay, so be prepared for that one. I should say the personal statement focused interview, that's most subjects, to be honest. The only thing I would say is if it's a subject you haven't studied at school, they don't expect you to have done at school, like politics, law, they may not focus so much on your personal statement. But as I say, for other subjects like sciences, humanities, to be honest, most of them, they will try and draw on your personal statement. As I said, with the written work, if you've got written work, then the chances are they may ask you about it. In terms of a source-based interview, this is very much a humanities type of interview. So what they usually do is they'll give you a source, they'll give you 15 minutes to read it, and they'll usually give you a few questions that they'll want you to answer in the interview. Then you go into the interview room and they will then ask those questions. You'll discuss those questions and then possibly you'll expand upon it. They'll mostly ask some questions based off of what you've said. So once again, that's quite typical, particularly with things like history. Problem-based interview. So I had one of these with politics, but they're also a science and maths type of interview. So they'll give you, with politics, they may give you a problem sheet, which you'll have 10 to 15 minutes to look at. With things like sciences, they may give you questions to answer, or as I say, like a problem to solve, a maths equation, which is quite tricky. And then the interview will be about walking through that problem step by step. So you'll explain your reasoning as to why you think things, because it's the, as it says at the bottom, there's how you think, not the right answer. They're interested in how you approach the issues. So you explain what you can do, but if there's a bit you don't know, then do say don't know. That's actually a tip which I haven't included in here. But if you don't know, please say don't know. Don't try and make up some random waffle or pretend you understand. If you need them to repeat the question, ask them to repeat the question. They totally understand it. So that's kind of the problem-based interview format. And a knowledge-based interview, so this is a sciences type of interview. You won't get this in the humanities because they'll only ask you about things you've mentioned. Or they may ask you something about your A-levels if you've included that on your UCAS. But knowledge-based interviews like sciences, so they'll be testing basically if you have the level of knowledge they expect, which will be A-level usually. Or blend, so you can get a mix either within the same interview or you'll have a range of interviews. I mean, from what I remember, Cambridge are pretty uniform, that you usually have 2 interviews, whereas Oxford aren't very uniform. So some people have 2, some people have 3, some of them have to be with only 1 college, some of them have to be over a range of colleges, some people do 6 interviews over 2 colleges, 6 over 3. I have heard of 9 over 6 colleges. I mean, it's a whole random thing. And to be honest, there's nothing to look into it. So if you have applied to an institution that does interviews like that, where you really don't know how many interviews you actually end up with at the end, there is nothing. The people with so many interviews, they may get in. The people who just have the normal number of interviews, they may get in. Doesn't affect your chances. It's just how things go. As I was just saying, I think it's really important to repeat, with maths, of course, you want to get to the right answer at the end, but that is the whole interview of 20 minutes, however long it is. That's what the process, but it is about the process you're going through. It's like, maths papers. You only get so many marks for the final answer at the end, but it is about your method, and that's what they're interested in. So hopefully that outlines some of the main sort of interview types you may find. And I know that, there's websites out there that say, things like, oh, you'll walk into the room and they'll ask you, what have unicorns and fish got anything to do with each other? And you'll be expected to give an instant answer. But to be honest, I mean, some people ask those questions. I have heard of some of those questions being asked right at the beginning, but it didn't happen with me, and it didn't happen with a lot of people. So it isn't always entirely random. And even if the question you think is random, just try and answer it as best you can. That's all you can do. They're not expecting you to know everything. To be honest, they don't want students, if I'm being blunt, who know everything, because they can't teach them anything. That's why they do the interviews, to see if you're a student who they could get on with and who they think has potential and who they can teach. Okay, so in terms of preparation, whatever you've submitted to them, know it, is the first really important point. So your personal statement, make sure you know everything in it. Hopefully you haven't lied in your personal statement. If you have, I think now would be a good time to catch up on whatever you didn't read or said that you knew which you don't know, and make sure that you do know it. Your written work, if you've submitted it, they could ask about it. Make sure you know what it says. Make sure you know the argument. Possibly have some extra ideas as well you didn't include in the essay, because it shows that you've really thought about it and you haven't just said exactly what's already in the essay. So do read over them. It is also, know your subject, as it says there. Make sure you know your A-level subjects. So, I mean, admittedly, they can't expect you to know everything about the course, but do make sure that if they ask a general question about it, you could give a good answer. I mean, a lot of the people who interview, chances are, I mean, it depends what subject it is, to be honest, but in history, chances are they most probably are not going to be from the time period that you study. You may find that, and some people would see that as lucky because you can have a really insightful conversation, and some people would see it as really bad because they will ask really in-depth questions about it. But yeah, just know your stuff. And if there is anything you forget in the interview because of nerves or pressure, but it's not a problem. They will understand it. I mean, in my interview, for example, I was given a sheet of names, and it was about voting. There was 3 candidates, and there was basically 3 different rounds of voting, and I had to explain how it worked. And I just kept forgetting the names of all the candidates, and I kept jumbling them up. And I mean, I made it here, so obviously it didn't go that badly, and they were totally understanding of that. Practice is really important. So please don't turn up to your interview and sound like a robot and have pre-prepared answers to every single question, because I can guarantee you, if you come across like that, I'm afraid you're not going to get in. But make sure that you practice, with teachers, if you have mentors, have academic discussions with, people. Just try and explain something to your friends, possibly in a subject they're not studying, because that's a good test. Because as much as many of these people will be world leading in their field, they also may be world leading in a field that you're not quite talking about. So do be prepared for that, but at the same time, make sure you know your stuff. And as it says at the bottom, don't have stock answers. It is better if it is spontaneous, because tutorials, or supervisions as they're called at Cambridge, they are meant to be spontaneous discussions. You mostly won't know what's coming up. Frankly, I mean, I make sure I've reread my essay and if I've got any feedback for it, but I only spend 10 to 15 minutes preparing for a tutorial because there's so much other stuff I need to do in a week that I haven't really got time to prepare for it much better than that. So it is good to start getting into habits of just being prepared and able to think on your feet quite quickly. Okay, so I mean, I've used a really fancy geographical term here, but basically this is the stuff to get right before your interview. That's what the antecedent conditions things mean. That's another thing as well. Don't use tons of fancy jargon, unlike what I just did there. So there's some key points here. So mindset. So don't be really, really shy. The interviews, the interviews will try and make you feel as comfortable as you can feel over Zoom. But at the same time, make sure you do talk to them. It is important that you talk to them. At the same time, don't be ridiculously confident, because as I said, they want students who are teachable. So it doesn't have to be that you know everything in the world. In fact, knowing everything in the world mostly would be a disadvantage. They want students who show potential, who take on new information quickly and can work with it, who say if they don't know, they don't know. That's what they want. It needs to be an honest conversation, because it is a conversation as well. Yes, it is formal in the sense that you know you are talking to academics, but at the same time, you know, it is a bit more conversational, in terms that you should try and explain your thought processes. So be prepared to be challenged. They will mostly throw in questions you are not expecting. They mostly throw in questions that frankly you don't know how to answer, and you've got to try and interpret even what the question's getting at. I still get that now, to be honest. The tutor will ask a question and I'm trying to work out what they're actually asking. And sometimes I do say, what are you looking for? Because I'm not quite sure exactly what information you'd like me to explain. Being nervous is natural. That's quite important. Most probably everybody's gonna be nervous. I mean, for some people, most probably the fact it's over video conferencing is a big win. I mean, I'm a bit less nervous over video conferencing, but some people will find it a lot more challenging, particularly with the body language barriers. So understand that being nervous is natural. Nerves can be a good thing. And as I say, if you bumble up a few names or you say something really stupid, so like I think the most stupid thing I said in my interviews was they asked me, what was the biggest challenge to Thatcher? And I didn't mention the unions once for the entire interview. I mean, why I didn't, just totally didn't come into my head, but that was mostly nerves and it's not an issue. Look forward to the interview. I know that sounds really weird, but it is a conversation. You have made it, you know, if you do get the offer for the interview, you've made it that far. That is an achievement in itself, because thousands and thousands of people apply. And to even make it to an interview, you've beaten ridiculous odds even to get there. So, you know, be proud of it and also look forward to the conversation, because these people are at the cutting edge of their field. They will know tons. If you need to stop to think, then please do. The worst thing to do is if they ask a question and you rush straight into answering it and you haven't really thought it through. Sometimes it's better to stop for a few minutes and just think about what you're actually trying to say. Well, say a few minutes, don't do 3 minutes, because they'll just look at you really weirdly. A few seconds is fine to have a pause and think about what you're going to say. Work with the tutor. So when I say that, I mean, be prepared, as I say, to be challenged and to explain your reasoning. And if you're not quite sure, say you're not quite sure, they may give you some new information, so work with that. Be engaged, so look like you're listening to them and actively be listening to them. When they ask you a question, make sure you focus on the question. You want to answer the question just like an essay. That's quite important. In terms of technology, I mean, of course, this isn't in way when they were in person, but you have got online interviews this year, or at least Oxford have said they're doing that, and I think Cambridge are, I'm sure other institutions are as well. So make sure your computer works. So for example, I've mostly failed on this test because my computer randomly turns itself off at any given interval because it's a bit dodgy. But make sure the computer you're working with actually works. Make sure your laptop is charged. And to be honest, I'd most probably just leave it plugged into the mains anyway, even if it's got a good battery, just to make sure, because you don't want it to turn off mid-interview. It doesn't make a good impression. Make sure the place is quiet. So they are expecting you to do these interviews during the school day in schools, or at least that's what the Oxford guidance is, but make sure you are in a quiet room. So don't do it in the middle of a really rowdy sixth form centre, because that's not a good idea. The background noise will be both distracting for you and the tutor, so don't do that. Make sure everything's working. As well, you know, I think most of it is going to be over Zoom or Teams. Make sure they're up to date. Make sure you've installed the software beforehand. Make sure you're on time, all those sort of things. So as I was saying just there about time, so make sure you're ready for your interview 10, 15 minutes earlier than the time they've given you. Give yourself a bit of time just to, you know, contemplate, sit, relax, think, eat the snack, whatever. And don't rush to be ready, because that never helps. Wear comfortable clothes. So I wore jeans for my interviews. Some people find dressing formally, dressing up for the occasion as they describe it, helps them. If that is you, then feel free to do it. It isn't a problem. It is far better to dress formally if that will make you feel more confident and then you succeed in your interviews than not. So, you know, interviews are important in that sense. And, you know, make sure you've eaten and drunk properly. Have a bottle of water to hand. Make sure you've had enough sleep. Have a snack just before or after. Have a bit of time off if you can afterwards. But don't think about the interview massively crazily, because to be honest, some people leave their interviews think it's gone terribly and they get an offer, and some people leave their interviews think it's gone really, really great and they don't get an offer. So once again, to be honest, your perception will be warped of how it's gone. The tutors will know what they're looking for, and even if you make a ton of silly mistakes, if they've seen potential, then you'll be fine anyway. Okay, so I thought it'd be worth just talking about my interview experience in terms of what history and politics look like, which might be quite helpful for the people who are looking at PPE or history and HSPS. And in terms of maths, because I know, of course, that is a bit different, I'll try and make some links as to how actually some things I had to do a little bit similar to maths. I just say with maths, chances are they are going to set you a question which you're going to work through. In terms of technology requirements as well, because it's just reminded me, I know Oxford have released their guidance, which I have shared. But make sure for whatever institution you're going for that you have looked at the technology requirements and you make sure you have them with plenty of time. If you don't have the equipment, make sure to communicate with your school. I know at least Oxford are reaching out to schools to make sure they have the correct equipment, because for example, level 3 of their technology requirements, which is for subjects like maths, you have to have an interactive tablet with a stylus, which may be a challenge for some people, particularly from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. So they are trying to work with schools to make sure that everybody has the materials to do that. So in regards to my experience, yes, it was in person, so that does make it a little bit different, but there's still a lot of things that are applicable. I'm mainly going to focus, of course, on the actual interviews themselves and not the rest of the days, which I basically spent in museums. So my first interview I only had 2 interviews. They're both at my college, the college who accepted me. So my politics interview was on the day that I got there in the afternoon. I was given a problem sheet as such. I say as such because it isn't quite a problem sheet like you get in maths or some of the ones I actually get from history, because I have some maths in history because I chose that unit. So the problem sheet basically was 2 scenarios and I had to think through them. So one of them was basically, as I say, there was 3 candidates standing for election. There was 3 rounds of voting, pitting one against the other, but it wasn't an elimination. It was everyone had been pitted against each other at some point, and basically each candidate won 1 round, and the whole crux of it was trying to work out who won from that. So that was a discussion for about 10 or so minutes, and then the other thing was a newspaper article. I think it was about the wearing of motorcycle helmets and exemptions for some religions, and whether that could be justified. And that was what the discussion was about. So I had to explain the reasoning, and then the tutor came with some alternative points. And that was the politics interview. So in terms of how that links to maths, I mean, as I say, there was the problem sheet. You'll mostly get that beforehand in maths, so you may get it in the interview. But working through problems and explaining your thinking is going to be exactly the same as actually how politics functioned. Politics is one of those subjects, as I say, they didn't expect pre-knowledge. So even though I did tons of it in my personal statement, they didn't ask about it, though we did actually get on to some of the concepts I discussed, because I used some of the concepts I discussed in my personal statement to back up my point of view. So we got onto discussions about that. But they'll only do that if you show you're knowledgeable on it, because they don't expect you to be knowledgeable. So history interview was on the morning of the 2nd day of my 3 days of interviews. So what they gave me for that was they gave me a source, and I had 20 minutes, and there were some questions at the bottom. So it was basically explaining, you know, what was contained within the source. They didn't expect me to have any historical knowledge of the period, though I was very, very lucky because I'd actually read a whole book on what came up. So whilst you weren't massively meant to, we discussed the content, and then I brought in the book that I'd read, and I discussed how that book linked to the extracts and some of the links I can make between that. But that isn't expected. If you're lucky and it's something you know about, make sure you focus on what the source actually says first. But I don't actually think there's a problem as long as the tutor's happy for you to just bring up if you do know something about the subject. That doesn't hurt. So that was half of the interview. The other half of the interview was my written work. So I'd submitted an essay on Thatcher. So it was basically summarize your argument. In terms of that, I will give some advice on that, which I've had from some tutors as well. I've been here, which is when you're summarizing your argument, do not just say, I spoke about this factor, then this factor, then this factor, because you've not actually got to. They want a bit of detail about it. So they don't want you to quote the entire essay at you, but it's worth explaining, I argued this in one sentence. And then for your, the first paragraph of the essay that you're trying to summarize, your first point, you say, I was looking at this factor, I argue this about this factor, and then possibly just in another sentence mention an example. So it's PEE. The only thing I would say, which is once again something I picked up here, which is it should be argument, then the evidence to support your argument, rather than using the evidence to then make your argument. You should be basically saying, I believe this, this is why I believe this, instead of saying the evidence is this, therefore I believe this. It's just a twist in emphasis, but it means it is driven about how you view the topic, because everyone will have a different interpretation. And you do the same for each. So you're mostly looking at 9 sentences if we're going to be writing it down, and possibly then at the end you just give another concluding sentence to summarize everything that you said, and then they'll pick out some details that they want to find out more about. I mean, with mine, as I say, my essay was on Thatcher, but we actually got on to social issues, which is something I hadn't covered in my essay, and I was asking questions about that, which I will admit I wasn't massively prepared for, but I tried to, work on the fly with it as best I could. And then I also linked it back to some knowledge I did have on a slightly earlier period and some of the impacts that had. So if you don't know something on a particular area, there are ways of filling it in. I do know, as I say, at least from an Oxford perspective, that the JCR, which is the Junior and Common Room, so it's the undergraduate body, they are, at least as I say here, intending to run social activities every evening. They are trying to make it as inclusive an experience as possible, because of course you can't be there, but they are trying to give you that experience. So I know Cambridge usually only do 2 interviews in a day and you go home, but as I say, Oxford usually come for a few days, and they're trying to replicate that experience with activities that they'll be running, like quizzes, film nights, that sort of thing. My advice is take part in those, because you'll feel part of a wider community. I mean, some of the people I met then, I have now met here, and they recognize me and I recognize them. So that's quite good, because you feel like you're hitting the ground running in that sense. So that's really, really positive. And I think as well, it takes your mind off it, and you get a wider sense of what it's actually like to be at that college, because you've got to also make sure that the place is right for you. Hopefully you've done your research already, but the interview is about seeing if you feel you can fit into the environment. I would just say, if you find the interview hard, that doesn't mean you won't fit into the environment. Most people who are studying at Oxford and Cambridge find it hard. Most people at most universities mostly find it hard, but I mean, particularly from anecdotal experience, a lot of people here will find it tough, and they are here, they've made it, they've walked out with 4 A stars, but that's part of getting used to it. So I wouldn't say if you feel your interviews are a bit rough, that's the end of the road. I wouldn't rule it out at all. Most would be quite surprised, to be honest, but a lot of people who find it rough do get through. Now, model interviews, of course, are the next stage. They will still be using the evidence they had previously, so your contextualized data of how you performed at your school. If you've submitted written work, they'll give that a score, your personal statement, whatever information they have on you, they'll be using that within their decision-making processes. So yes, it is about assessing if you're right for the tutor and you feel you get on well in that environment, but once again, it's not end of the world. And also we'll just say, while you're doing your interviews or whatever, make sure you keep in touch at home. I mean, admittedly, you are going to be at home, so it is a bit different, but it is good to keep up with friends, family while you're at home. And, you don't need to be revising your personal statement late into the night or anything. I most probably spent about half an hour revising it the night before the interview. And I spent about an hour or so the week before just prepared to fill any gaps where I thought they possibly might ask further questions. So, you don't need to go over the top with your preparation, but make sure you are prepared. I think we're getting towards the end. Yeah, okay. So that's the end of the formally sort of presentation. Hopefully you've managed to learn some stuff from that. So what I'll do now is I'll stop the share, And if anyone wants to, just raise your hand and unmute, and then I'll answer some questions if you've got any. The simple answer to that question is possibly. Possibly. I went to quite a few Cambridge talks because that was when I was quite seriously looking at going to Cambridge. And as I say, I only changed my mind really because of the course and my experience of Unique. And when I was there, they gave an admissions talk, and I did ask one of the history tutors because they said, make sure you have extra knowledge about your A-level content. And they said, yes, be prepared. There could be questions about the content of what you're studying. So if you're not studying it yet, one thing to say is with the sciences, if it is in the specification of an exam paper you have to sit, then you will need to know it. But for example, in history, humanities, if you haven't got onto that topic yet, they won't expect you to have knowledge of it. But I would be prepared. There could be questions on your A-level course. But I didn't personally experience that. The only time that I kind of did was in the history interview. It was a book I'd read for the A-level course, which linked to the source they'd given me, which is why I spoke about it, because it did link nicely, but that was only because I chose to. They didn't ask me to. It wasn't expected. So once again, I hope it is a bit of a roundabout answer. To be honest, you never know. Every tutor has their own preferences. They'll approach things differently, but they could do. But I wouldn't spend like a week learning all your A-level content like it's a mock exam. I'd make sure, to be honest, you just focus on your personal statement, your written work. If you're doing things like history, prepared for source analysis. If it's maths, you're prepared for, I mean, you don't have to be at a year one level in terms of undergraduate, but be prepared that they'll check you a first year undergraduate maths problem at you, and be prepared to show you working and explain your process to a tutor. But yeah, do be aware of your A-level content. Thank you for attending the interview workshop.